Okay, guys, it is now time for us to talk about the pro wrestling storyline and basically what it was all about back in the territory days. A lot of people, when they look at wrestling today, I don't think they understand the actual storyline and how it was important to professional wrestling and how it was done back in the territory days. A storyline would start off with you would decide between two wrestlers, whoever they might be, and you would say, all right, we have to create an angle. We have to create a storyline between you. And I guess if you want to look at that and you want to just kind of parallel that, you would have to look at Dusty Rhodes. And Rodney, this was the angle. And I think you know where I'm going with that, with Dusty Rhodes and Ole Anderson. They were going to put them together, and now I think you could probably explain the storyline of Dusty Rhodes being the guest referee in the whole thing. And that was the angle that they were going to do to get Dusty Rhodes and Ole Anderson together.
Sure, and that was one of many. Ole and Dusty had already had prior to that ongoing. Ole and Gene against Dick Slater and Dusty Rhodes the year before in 1977. So the Georgia Tag Team Championship was going to be on the line. It was going to be Ole Anderson and Ivan Koloff against Jack and Jerry Briscoe, who they defeated for the titles. On television, Stan Hansen hurt Jerry Briscoe, so it's substitution. Mr. Wrestling 2 would take Jerry Briscoe's place against Ole Anderson and Ivan Koloff. But in all this, a special guest referee was going to be announced, and then it was great because Dusty come out there and Dusty was Ole was getting in Dusty's face, and he said, "I just want you to know I am your special guest referee," and it sets it up, absolutely sets it up for the Atlanta City Auditorium as Georgia Tag Team Championship on the line. Ole Anderson, Ivan Koloff against Wrestling 2 and Jack Briscoe. Dusty's a special guest referee, and that's when the parking lot incident happens at the Atlanta City Auditorium, and Dusty comes down the steps there at the City Auditorium and staggers and passes out in the aisleway there leading to the ring at Atlanta City Auditorium. I would always remember that they showed that clip of him coming down the steps as a bumper for years on Georgia Championship Wrestling. And when we went to the Omni the very next week, I think it was, that place was packed. People were sitting on the steps. They sold more seats than you can ever imagine as Ole Anderson, Ivan Koloff against Cowboy Bill Watts and Dusty Rhodes, and it was on fire. 78 was huge in Georgia.
But that was the angle. It was set up Dusty Rhodes, Ole Anderson, Dusty Rhodes, the angle, Dusty Rhodes being jumped in the parking lot, and this would set up to the program. Jack, do you know of any other, before we move on to the program and what the program is, another angle that was done that people can kind of say, well, okay, I get that that's the angle, that's what started this. Do you have any other matches that you can think of?
Well, of course, my favorite angle storyline of all time, cover years, Rodney, was Kevin Sullivan and Austin Idol, where they wound up in the cage match, and Austin drugged Kevin's brother into the ring, and I mean, it was just a tremendous setup because it was different. It was a heel Austin Idol being attacked by a young incoming, up and coming babyface Kevin Sullivan for no apparent reason, and you couldn't figure out what was going on. And over time, they started slowly giving those reasons and setting that storyline. And I mean, it went on for weeks and weeks and weeks before they actually ever started having matches. And then when they started having matches, those were tremendous matches. But even the matches didn't have to be as strong because the storyline was so strong. So, that remains to me one of my most favorite storyline memories of all time.
But it always starts with an ideal. The pen, and wrestling business, the pencil is mightier than the sword. It's only as good as what you decide to do with two wrestlers or four wrestlers or whatever. But it has to start with a reason. And it always starts with a reason. And then it goes into a program. Most programs, if you were the WWF or you were Vern Gagne, it went on for 6 months. So you would know, okay, in 6 months we're going to blow this off. It's going to be the big blow off, and then you were always going to work backwards so that you could get to that match. Now, 3 months was the territories. Atlanta, Memphis, they would do a 3 month. Now, sometimes they would do another angle on that 12th week to make it go on for another 3 months, especially if they were drawing money.
You know, like the Von Brauners against Lynn Rossi and Bearcat Brown.
Yeah. So that was the and it's important if you are a promoter, if you're someone promoting or you're a booker, it is very important. Don't just write down names. And I don't think, Jack, and you've probably seen this, where people wrote down names and didn't have a clue what they were going to do 12 weeks down the road. Have you run into this in professional wrestling today?
Many times. It's one of my biggest frustrations.
Rodney?
Yeah, it's not existing right now. You really cannot find in any organization one of the great rivalries. We talked about Dusty Rhodes and Ole Anderson. You talk about Wrestling 2 and the Superstar, Wrestling 2 and the Spoiler, Wrestling 2 and Dick Slater, anybody Wrestling 2 just about. You talk about Dusty Rhodes and Terry Funk. You talk about the Freebirds and the Von Erichs, Junkyard Dog, and as we talked about earlier, Butch Reed of Midnight Express, Rock and Roll Express. Bill Dundee and Jerry Lawler, Jackie Fargo and Jerry Lawler. I mean, Ricky Steamboat and Ric Flair. These are matches that, I mean, and they drew every place they went. They drew. It was just, it's amazing. It really is amazing. And these were, sometimes it was accident, but most of the time they knew exactly what they were doing from the beginning. There was no doubt when the Superstar came to Georgia, exactly what's going to happen. Everybody could see it. I mean, Midnight Express and Rock and Roll Express in Mid-South, that's just the names led you to believe these two are going to clash somewhere down the line. And it was money and it was magic when it did.
Yeah.
And you know, when you're talking about the angle, another angle that happened in Southeastern Championship Wrestling, it was Dennis Condrey, Randy Rhodes against Bob and Brad Armstrong. The angle was they'd already wrestled each other, but they were going to enhance this angle for it to go further, another 3 months. And Tommy Weathers was the referee. Bob Armstrong was handcuffed to one side of the ring. Dennis Condrey and Randy Rhodes, I can't remember which one now, they were handcuffed together. And Tommy Weathers, being that nasty Tommy Weathers that he was, he unlocked Randy Rhodes or Dennis Condrey, and they sat there and they beat Brad Armstrong to death while what's his name had that key in his hand and he was waving it in front of Bob Armstrong. Yeah. And he was grabbing and hold. And that was the angle set up for a 3-month program. Now, they'd already wrestled each other for about 3 months. But that's a different situation. They worked for 3 months. They did an angle. They worked for 3 months. They did an angle so they could go and do the program for the 12 weeks. And then they had the big blow off. It always was a blow off, whether it was a cage match, whether it was a lumberjack match, a coal miner's glove match. It always ended with the blow off. And and if you were a smart booker, you didn't blow off everything in 12 weeks. You had to
space it out,
spread that out.
Like you had overlapping storylines.
We have to remember, Dusty and Ole were doing their things. Now, Dusty was not working in Georgia full time. He was in and out. So at the same time, Ole and Ivan was also working with Tommy Rich and Tony Atlas. And so at the same time, Wrestling 2 and Superstar was building up. At the same time, Kevin Sullivan and Austin Idol was doing their thing. So, you always have things working, and then you're able to bring in Jack and Jerry Briscoe and the Funks and to offset when you have those in-between weeks. Ric Flair came in as United States champion. Blackjack Mulligan came in. And you know exactly what you're going to do with these people.
Michael Barr has a question, and I'll start with Jack. How long would a storyline go out? I think we answered that, but until it became something different, Jack?
Well, your dad is the one who taught me how to do that. So, 12 weeks was my norm. Sometimes I knew what I wanted to lead up to, like in January, what I wanted to lead to for my Thanksgiving show. But it wasn't, you couldn't keep 2 guys or 4 guys, whatever it was. You could not keep them for that many months together. So you had to do something, and then you had to pull back, and then you had to segue into, or swerve, as we call it, swerve into something else along the way until ultimately you brought them back together. And everybody, if they're fans and you're doing it right, they're going to remember where all this heat was before, so that it means something. But in the short term, that 12-week, you know where you want to end, so then you write backwards. And that secret is as we were mentioned there, is you don't overlap. Everybody can't have 12-week angles at one time. You've got one person in a 12-week angle, and then you've got somebody else halfway already into a 12-week angle, or somebody else a little farther along, or even more behind. But you got to position all that out. This is the part that I love best about wrestling, is writing all that stuff out.
And you've got to be very important. It's very important that the wrestlers have their input in the program.
Yes.
They may not have the input in the angle. They may not have the input in the blow off, but you have to give them that 12 weeks of how we're getting there. That's very important, isn't it, Rodney?
Absolutely. Dad laid out with Buzz Sawyer and Tommy Rich what he was going to do with them, and they added tremendous amount. Dad set the outline, and then they added a lot of the details you saw was them, and it was their experience and their know-how.
And Wrestling 2 Superstar, their angle as well. It started out the last time they wrestled each other. It started out Wrestling 2 getting his robe tore up on television. That was the angle. Then they went to the program, went to the shackle matches, and all the stuff that they did that would lead up to their end.
Nightmares against Jerry Stubbs and Dirty White Boy, Dutch Mantell and Wendell Cooley, all they had their input in what was going on.
Yep.
Victor Nash said, did Dusty Rhodes ever feud with Dick Slater?
Yes. In Florida, he did.
Mickey Mayfield said, when 2 territories share their talent, who got paid, the talent or the promotion? Jack?
Well, I think a lot of that had to do with where those guys were on the card. If you're sharing Ric Flair, then Ric Flair is going to get paid well, plus the promotion he's home based at gets cut, plus the NWA gets cut. So, there's a lot of pockets to take care of in a situation like that. But normally, let's say a Dick Slater, if he's kind of peaked in Central States and he needs to go to Georgia for a while, then that's just a matter of, hey, he's available. Can you guys use him? Promotions work together because, if the talent's good, you eventually want them to come back. And the way they come back is that you take care of them in this process. Right. So, that's the way it goes.
Right. Normally, whoever is on the talent, if you say that if you were Bill Watts and you had Buzz Sawyer and Tommy Rich at the Superdome, normally it was Bill Watts paying the talent directly. I don't think he paid Wood Barnett.
Michael Barr asked the question, did a storyline ever give a wrestler a push, Rodney?
Most all storylines give wrestlers a push. Either way, it's always that way. If someone doesn't come out better off, or both do not come better off at the end of it, you've done something wrong. Think about it. Superstar in Wrestling 2 could have easily went against, of course, we did see it Superstar with Tommy Rich and Tony Atlas, and Wrestling 2 could have easily worked against Ole and Ivan or whoever else. So it's always great that a storyline should always at the end get everybody over. Same thing with Rock and Roll at Midnight, should be able to move on with somebody else and draw just as much.
Jack?
Oh yeah. I mean, the whole purpose of everything that we do is to push our talent out of any everything that we do. Even if you're just taking guys out there and letting them shine. they get a different opponent every time. You're still telling a story. You're showing how good they are, and you're building up to an actual storyline with somebody at some point. Bill Goldberg is your prime example of that.
Yeah. Daniel Lang said the San Martino Zbyszko storyline was incredible. The way they build it little by little every week until it finally climaxed at the cage match in Shea Stadium. That was the great storyline. That was the angle. They did the angle between San Martino Zbyszko. Then they did the program, and then the cage match was the blow off. That's it's simple, but then again, if you do not really realize the wrestling business and know the wrestling business, you will miss something.
And the key there was Bruno Sammartino was over like nobody's business. So Zbyszko, I think Zbyszko hit him in the chair. That set the stage to the big show coming up, and Zbyszko building that heat all the way to Shea Stadium, and it's huge. And then, of course,
Zbyszko, they had such backstory with that too, of that he had trained Larry and had brought him up in the business and had taught him so much, and then and Larry was quite successful up there for a long time. So that when that turn happened, it meant something. That whole story meant something.
And Zbyszko, we're not taking away from Zbyszko's talent either. Zbyszko knew exactly what he was doing. Interviews were just outstanding.
Richard Hood said, Jack, you are a wrestling mind. Is he talking about a mime or a mind?
Mind, I think he meant mind.
Well, I'm going to tell you, everything that I know about how to do wrestling came from Ronnie West and Bob Armstrong, guys who sat down with me and taught me. So
it's very important to really understand the wrestling business first. If you can understand it first, and it's not as people say, well, it's easy. Well, it's really not easy. Thought processing has to be there. You got to be very important that if you have 5 matches, they're not all working the arm the same match. Basically, they're working the arm. Make sure one guy works the arm, the next match they work the leg, the next match they do a headlock, the next match. Please, if you're booking a wrestling show, do not allow the wrestlers. You got to give them a certain guideline so you don't have the same match, because I have seen that happen. Victor said I skipped the comments. I'm going up, so I will get back. I will get back up to that, Victor. Michael Barr said, Brent, that angle and other angles drew the crowds. Takes a good booker to plan these angles. I agree with you. Michael Barr said, right, Rodney, most of them were great draws. Richard Hood asked, guys, which angle was better, Ole and Dusty or Ole and Thunderbolt? Rodney?
Wow, they were both awesome. They really were. Ole and Thunderbolt drew a lot of money together. And anyway, with Ole and Gene against Thunderbolt Patterson and Cowboy Bill Watts, they did a lot there too. It'd be hard to say. The most shocking of all the angles, though, was when Dusty got jumped in the parking lot. They didn't do that with Thunderbolt.
Yes. Victor Nash did say when we were talking about pro wrestling tees, if only 3 shirts, hopefully one of them will be my size.
What's the
other way, ProWrestlingTees.com. You can go there. 3 designs, not just 3 shirts. 3 designs.
Well, that's what you meant.
Right now, you just have to do a search, Pro Wrestling.
Yeah, and don't get lost on there, because they have thousands of great T-shirts. I'm wearing one now. This is from the Jerry Lawler
that's awesome.
Big show.
And the thing about it, great quality shirts.
Yes.
When you pay for the shirts, you're paying for a good shirt. You're not. It's not going to be thin. It's not going to be a bad shirt. You're going to get a good shirt every time you buy something.
Yeah, these are not iron on. They don't peel off. It's really good, top quality.
Michael Barr said, "I need a Jack's shirt T-shirt. No pun, Jack."
You can also use it for a car cover.
Victor Nash said, "Me too." I think we already answered that question. Now let me go on down through here and see where I was at. Kevin Penley said, so I'm guessing Dave Sullivan wasn't a Sullivan. Well, you don't hear Rodney talking bad about him, so you know what.
I haven't seen Mark.
Victor Nash said, have any of you watched the new NWA? If so, what are your thoughts? I have not watched it, Jack.
I have watched it, and I know a lot of those guys on there, and I am thankful to see a lot of them having jobs. Some of the stuff is good, but they tend to do so much comedy that, and it's not just them, you know, AEW, WWE, it seems like, you know, it's more comedy than serious wrestling. And that takes away from any product from me. As far as how is it compared to everything else out there? I think it stacks up as well as anything out there today. And they are starting back, I believe, in January.
Yeah, I have not watched it. I think the last time I watched it, Rock and Roll Express won the NWA tag team titles. I think that was the last time I watched it. Michael Barr said it almost most times start with two wrestlers like Jerry Stubbs and the Dirty White Boy run.
Yep.
And good stuff.
And lots of times one storyline led to the next. They played off of each other.
Michael Barr did say, Rodney, most of them were great draws. Michael Barr said, Brent, that angle and other angles drew the crowds. Takes a good. Well, I think we already went through that. Yep. So let's go on down. David Bean said, who did the storylines for the Nightmares? Danny Davis and Ken Wayne. I believe that was Danny Davis and Ken Wayne.
Yeah.
I believe they're the ones that came up with all that. Even though Eddie Gilbert was the booker, I think they're the ones that came up with that whole angle.
Yeah.
And Richard Hood did say mind. He said mind. Glenn Allen, Shelton, WLW. Your thoughts? What's this? WLW.
World League Wrestling. I've not got to see it.
I don't even know what it is. We'll have to look that up. Yeah. Glenn Allen said Harley Race now run by Leland Race. So his
he's talking about his training school.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, that's WLW, World League Wrestling. Yeah.
Mickey Mayfield said, how about Wrestling from Hollywood? Tried to watch, but didn't know anyone on the show. I've seen it. It looked good, but I only.
That was awesome. I saw that guy that's in every single movie, TV show doing the ring announcing on that show. I thought, I know him. I've seen him in everything from
David
or whatever. Yeah.
David Marquez is the mind behind all that. He's a friend of mine. He does a tremendous job. But that's the whole purpose of Championship Wrestling for Hollywood is they're showcasing new and upcoming talent. And you know, like most of the shows up there's a lot of them I like. There's some I don't really care for, but you know, I'd say that with WWE. But overall, they have a very, very good product, and especially considering all the difficulties they're having in California about even filming anything right now. They've done an excellent job.
Victor Nash said, whatever happened to Billy Jack? I think the man went crazy. That's what I think.
Yeah.
Ooh, Victor, just do Billy Jack Haynes. I believe you might have to put the Haynes part on this, but go listen to his interviews. By the way, we can't use what they call the interviews anymore. We can just call them interviews, or we will get knocked off the air.
Yeah,
you cannot use that word in anything anymore, or we will get knocked off the air. But it's interviews, and go listen to his interview. Very informational interview for Billy Jack Haynes. That's all I can tell you about it. Michael Barr. Was it always the booker that wrote the angles, or was it the promoter? Mostly it was the booker. They always had a booker. Now, I'm not saying the promoter didn't book it as well, but by most times, the Jim Barnett, he always had a booker. Now, Ron Fuller, he would book it, and then he would get Robert Fuller, Bob Armstrong to book it. All right, Louis Tilley there for a while was also a booker. So it was kind of a collaboration sometimes. Do you agree with that, Jack?
Yep. Right. I was there. I saw that. they had a very good system because they wouldn't, as a booker, you can get burnt out. And the way they swapped that book around, kept the product fresh, I believe.
Atlanta had all kinds of different bookers. Atlanta, when we first got there, it was Tom Ernesto. Then that split happened, and Tom Ernesto still booked in one, and then they had a ton of people that booked it. Bill Watts came in and booked Georgia Championship Wrestling, and then Jerry Jarrett came in and booked Georgia Championship Wrestling. Then Gary Hart came in and booked Georgia Championship Wrestling. I don't know, Gary Hart might have been in between there somewhere before he got there, but Ole Anderson booked it, Robert Fuller booked it, Louis DeLay booked it, Buck Robley, back to Ole Anderson, George Scott. There was all kinds of bookers while we were in Atlanta. So Richard Hood said, you guys remember Polynesian Championship Wrestling? Yes.
We sure do.
I enjoyed that show.
Yeah, Ricky Johnson, Rocky Johnson's brother, the Rock's uncle, and I are pretty good friends. And he posts a lot of stuff on his time at Polynesian Championship Wrestling, how much he loved it there.
Lars Anderson most of the time was the booker in Polynesian Championship Wrestling. We'll answer one more question, and then we'll have to get off of here. Glenn Allen Shelton said Gary Hart also in Texas, and Victor Nash also said, okay, thanks. Billy Jack was only here in Miami for 6 months. I don't think he ever stayed anywhere for a very long time because, well, just watch that interview. You'll see why.
Kind of wore his welcome out pretty quick.
Yes, he did. Leonard said Memphis had a booker, but Lawler called his matches, yes, at all times. I think he did. Daniel Lang said Dory Funk Jr. and Gary Hart don't get enough credit for booking Mid-Atlantic before Dusty in 1983. Also, Gary Hart doesn't get the credit he deserves, I don't think, for the time and the houses he drew in Texas.
Yeah.